Welcome to the Festival of Dangerous Ideas podcast. In the lead up to the 10th Festival of Dangerous Ideas program announced, we will be releasing a collection of 10 speakers from across the 10 years of the festival, a decade of danger. Sign up at festivalofdangerousideas.com to hear what we have lined up for 2020. The history of the Festival of Dangerous Ideas, for many people, starts with Christopher Hitchens. In the festival's first year in 2009, the journalist and public debater was an erudite provocateur, arguing that God is not great. Only a few years later, we lost Christopher Hitchens to cancer. In honour of this truly dangerous thinker, the festival launched a keynote speech titled The Hitch in 2019. His longtime friend Stephen Fry was the first speaker invited to carry the torch, and we hope that future festivals will highlight thinkers and ideas with just as much insight and irreverence as Hitchens himself. For now we present the one and only Christopher Hitchens in 2009 at the very first Festival of Dangerous Ideas.
Thank you, Your Reverence, for that suspiciously terse, grudging introduction. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, very much for coming. Thank you for laying on an evening of weather to remind me of my English boyhood. In other ways, to make me feel at home, as I always do when I visit Sydney, which is the only place I've so far visited where if you stay in the neighbourhood I am staying, you go for your daytime, or it might be a nighttime constitutional walk, and you wonder exactly how to get back. And you stop someone and say, "Excuse me," you find yourself saying, "Am I headed for the rocks?" Question I've asked myself many a time and on many a midnight stroll, but only in Sydney do they say, "Yeah, no worries." Good place for dangerous ideas, a chit-chat, in other words. A risk-taking kind of a spot. Rocks? No worries. I'm sorry for that reason, partly for that reason, to have missed your darkness at dawn moment the other day, because a lot of my early training in the apocalyptic came from the study of Australian letters. When I was a boy, I was very fond of the writing of Neville Shute. Town Like Alice, I particularly loved. In the Wet, No Highway, remember No Highway? Perhaps I'm giving away my age a bit, but of course, and I think most memorably, On the Beach, where the last people on Earth wait in Australia to see what kind of death is going to be brought to them on the prevailing winds. There were lots of ways, I now realize, tons of ways in which Neville Shute couldn't write. But he could write about the inevitable and about the possibility of extinction. In other words, that nature might not know we were here. The great challenge to our self-esteem, to our solipsism, that there could be a point in evolution where evolution that hadn't noticed we'd arrived wouldn't even notice that we'd gone either. And beautifully done, as some of you will have seen, by Stanley Kubrick on the screen, where as the inevitable gets nearer all the time, the churches decide it's time for a moment of uplift. And out come the Salvation Army girls with their tambourines and their tins, and the churches throw open their doors, and there's a big banner saying, "Repent. There is still time, brother," it reads. And it mocks what's coming, and it doesn't know it's doing it. Last attempt to fill up those empty spaces in the church. And at the close, the streets are empty, and it's a dusty, howling wilderness. But the banner, "There is still time, brother," is still flapping in the wind to mock all our illusions. And it's the attempt to live without illusions that I believe is the most dangerous, but the most worthwhile, and in some ways the most enjoyable undertaking, despite its risks, of all, and that's why I'm here, and that's why you're nice to have me. Now, cosmology is a real bastard in a lot of ways. It's made it ever harder, has been making it ever harder for us to think too highly of ourselves ever since Galileo deposed us from our very conceited position, the one we'd chosen for ourselves, of course, and had pointed out to us by the comforting church at the center of what was thought of as creation. Now it's almost a commonplace because of the knife edge of climatology on which we understand ourselves to live, and when we see the rest of our tiny little suburb of a solar system, an unimportant speck in an unimportant suburb of a little-known galaxy, just in our neighborhood, every other planet is either too hot to live in or too cold, and lots of our planet is one of those or the other, and the rest is on a knife edge, as we've increasingly come to understand. And so the probability of our being here forever is nil, and the possibility that we'll last as long as our planet isn't that great. But suppose we do. Here's something to cheer you up. You thought I came just to make you laugh or just to make you cry? Not a bit of it. Before I'm done, well, we'll see. I was at a festival in Hay-on-Wye. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, a wonderful town on the English-Welsh border, where there's now a beautiful annual literary festival a couple of years ago. And one of the speakers was Sir Martin Rees. Sir Martin is the professor of cosmology and astrophysics at Cambridge University. And he's also got the wonderful title of the Astronomer Royal, which even a Republican like myself can imagine wanting to have. Just as I live in Washington, I've never wanted a political job, but if I was to be given grace and favor by the president, it would be the Bureau of Alcohol, Firearms and Tobacco. Anyway, I can't be the Astronomer Royal, but I can quote what Sir Martin said in an extraordinary speech called Dark Materials, which was the Joseph Rotblat Memorial Lecture. And there was a paragraph in it that completely arrested me, and I'm going to, as they say, share it with you. Most educated people, said Sir Martin, are aware that we are the outcome of nearly 4 billion years of Darwinian selection. But many tend to think that humans are still somehow the culmination of that. Our sun, however, is less than halfway through its lifespan. It will not be humans who watch that sun's demise 6 billion years from now. Any creatures that then do exist will be as different from us as we are from bacteria or amoeba. I find that an arresting thought, in some ways a depressing one, in some ways an inspiring one. It certainly makes me feel that one mustn't consider evolution as producing us as its last word. That would be a sort of insult to any scientific process. We happen to know that even in the measurable distance of the last few thousand years, that progress is going forward in our brain formation. I think our job is to remain, without illusions, integral, intact, keep our planet that way as best we can, and pass it on so that this experiment gets more interesting. And if you'll allow me to say so, what I just quoted to you from Sir Martin, unless I much mistake my audience, is genuinely awe-inspiring. You think of watching... Good. Now, I mean, really awe-inspiring, not like seeing a burning bush would be awe-inspiring, for example. Really awe-inspiring. You think of creatures gradually watching the sun die, and they're not us. And they're as far from us as bacteria, our ancestors, are from us. If that isn't mind-expanding, if that isn't awe-inspiring, then you don't have the capacity for awe, and you won't be able to get it from a holy book either. In other words, it's not a matter of whether you laugh or cry, it's a matter of how you think and what you think. And the realization that comes with it is congruent with many things, I believe, but not with the idea that truth can come from desert revelations made to schizophrenics and epileptics. It's a strange thing, isn't it, when you are on a bus now and someone starts talking about how they've got a message from God. I don't know, maybe I'm different. Do you move nearer them? I thought so. Now, Sir Martin, as it happens, is a mild and skeptical, but church-going member of the Anglican Communion. His family's been going to the same church in Cambridge, I think, for a very long time. It's a practice he makes. It doesn't have anything at all to do with his scientific work or beliefs. And why should it? I'm coming now to the point that I warned Tony I wanted to stress, and we're going to talk about later, of the famous observation made by Stephen Jay Gould, wonderful biologist and paleontologist, that religion and science are non-overlapping magisteria, as he put it. There's no necessary reason why they should be in conflict. The two ideas can coexist in the same mind. I was a great admirer of Gould's, but I think I want to disagree, and here's how. Of course, a great scientist can also be a person of faith. Joseph Priestley, for example, who more or less discovered oxygen, as we understand it, and whose laboratory was smashed for profanity by monarchist and loyalist mobs in Birmingham and drove him over to Philadelphia. He was a Unitarian, a great man of science and the Enlightenment, but he believed in the phlogiston theory. Alfred Russel Wallace, who did most of Darwin's early work for him, not just on selection, but on continental drift as well, working to your near north that you used to call the Far East, Indonesia, loved nothing better than spiritualist seances. Really liked a bit of table turning and table rapping and burblings from the beyond to sweeten his day. The greatest scientist Cambridge ever produced, possibly, arguably, Sir Isaac Newton, was an alchemist, kept a furnace permanently going in his rooms, which he several times set fire to, in case the moment would come when he would work out how to turn lead into gold. Believed that the Catholic Church was the Antichrist, may have been onto something. Was obsessed with the measurements of he thought it would be better to know the measurements of the original temple than to find out about gravitational theory. Anyway, but a great scientist. It goes on. And there were many brilliant German physicists, rivals and contemporaries of Einstein, working in the same field, who believed that there was Aryan science and Jewish science, and there were two different types of physics. So, of course, these things can coexist, but it seems to me that it's not a matter of their coexistence or their overlap as to whether or not they are compatible, whether or not they're ultimately reconcilable. For example, I'm talking now not just about what people think, but about how. It was a Catholic, not just a Catholic physicist, but actually a man in holy orders, Georges Lemaitre of the University of Louvain, who in the 20s anticipated the idea of the Big Bang, quarreled with Einstein about it, said that he didn't call it the Big Bang, that comes later, he thought of it as the egg from which the universe suddenly burst. And was right, and Einstein had to admit that he was probably the first to get onto this use of the theory of relativity. He took it to the Pope, Pope Pius XI it was, and the Pope was so impressed, being warned that this theory was likely, that he offered to Father Lemaitre, Professor Lemaitre, he said, if you like, I'll make it dogma. I'll say that people have to believe it. He said, well, actually, it's very nice of you, Your Holiness, but that would be sort of missing the point of a scientific experiment. That's what I mean by saying this mentality is not congruent, not compatible. It's not really reconcilable. And I think we're going to increasingly have to face this, whether we're driven by evidence or by reasoning. Staying with the macro for a bit, one gets asked, you get asked, if you're me, by believers, well, how come there's something and not nothing? It's a very good question. It's actually a very important question. It's asked from the point of view of something, from the point of view of the only species we know of anywhere that could ask that question. It looks out onto vast expanses of nothingness, where nothing is happening and where there is no life. And so you have to make the assumption that you are there and that you're able, so you know how all that goes. It rather alters the question when it's being asked in that way, but still, it's a good question, but it doesn't have any very helpful answers, or not if you consider, for example, Edwin Hubble was the first to notice that Newton was wrong and that the universe is not just expanding away from itself, the so-called red light shift at a terrific speed, but you would expect this speed in Newtonian terms to be the rate of its expansion, I mean to say, velocity, to be declining. To the contrary, Hubble noticed it's speeding up, it's getting faster all the time. All subsequent experiments have shown this. In fact, if we hadn't discovered the Big Bang when we did, and we were trying for it now, examining the red light, some of that evidence would already have blown past us. if you can get your mind around this as around Sir Martin Rees's imagery of our cosmic future. As Professor Haldane used to say, the universe is not just stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine. But we know this much, that it's blasting apart very, very fast. A great deal of nothingness is certainly coming to us. There's an enormous amount of nothingness in our future. And even if we aren't prepared to wait for that or to wait for species change to overtake us, we can see already in the night sky the Andromeda galaxy on collision course with our own. That's certainly going to happen. Whether we destroy ourselves or the sun blows up or not before that, probably not. Collision course. Now, is this part of a plan? You suddenly have to ask yourself. Is that part of a plan? And if so, whose plan is it? That so much nothingness is built right in and is headed straight for us. So anyone who wants to ask the first question has to be willing to consider its corollary question. And the certainty in the second case, unlike the first, of an answer. So if you think that all this is going on in these gigantic fields of gravity and light with you in mind, then you really do have a self-centeredness problem. You might put it another way. I have tried to put it another way. I'll try it on you. Our first speaker tonight said that his people have been around for 100,000 years that we know about. That's certainly true. There is a difference of opinion about how long our species in general has been on the planet. It's a flash of a second in evolutionary time. Richard Dawkins thinks it might be as long as 250,000 years. Look, you make it 250,000. Francis Collins, the man who did the DNA decoding, the Human Genome Project, who's, by the way, another Christian scientist, or rather, a scientist who is a Christian. I won't make that mistake again. You know what Mark Twain said about the work of Mary Baker Eddy, the Christian Science writer, founder of it, her books? Chloroform in print, he said. This is a digression. It's a digression. Francis Collins says at least 100,000 years. We can show we've been around for that long. It's quite a long time. I'll take 100. Never mind. I don't need 250,000 for my point. Make it 100,000. 100,000 years, people have been, our species has been around on this speck. Born, usually dying. Actually, a great number of them in childbirth wouldn't have got beyond being born. For the first 80 or so, 90 or so thousand years, nearly 100, not living more than 25 to 30 years at the most, then probably dying of their teeth, if they were lucky, or of the other needless mammalian things that show us that we bear the stamp, as Darwin put it, of our lowly origin, the appendix we don't need anymore, innumerable other shortcomings of our design. We're designed to live on the savannah that we've escaped from. Terrible disease, suffering, misery, malnutrition, and fear. Where do the earthquakes come from? Why is there an eclipse? What are the shooting stars doing? And awful cults of sacrifice to try and ward off what are in fact natural events. And war, and rape, and the kidnap of other peoples and the enslavement of them. All of this goes on, gradually inching up to the point where you can brew beer, a breakthrough in my view, domesticate animals, separate one kind of corn from another. So very millimetrical progress, but terrible struggle, sacrifice, pain, misery, and above all, fear and ignorance. And you have to believe this if you believe in monotheism. For the first 97, 98,000 of this, heaven watches with indifference. Oh, there they go again. That whole civilization's just died out. Well, what are you going to do? They're raping each other again. They're poisoning. They think that the other tribe has poisoned the well, so they're going to kill all their children. All of this. Just watch all that. 3,000 years ago at the most, it's decided, no, we've got to intervene now. You have to believe it. You have to believe it. And the revelation must be personal, must appear. So we'll pick the most backward, the most barbaric, the most illiterate, the most superstitious, and the most savage people we can find in the most stony area of the world. We won't appear to the Chinese, who can already read. We won't appear in the Indus Valley where they know a thing or two and they're already, they're very far advanced. No. We'll appear to this brutal, enslaved, hopeless, superstitious crowd, and we'll force them to cut their way through all of their neighbors with slaughter, genocide, and racism, and settle on the only part of the Middle East where there's no oil. And all subsequent revelations occur in the same district. And without this, we wouldn't know right from wrong. Now, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, brothers and sisters, I know I'm capable of parody and at my lowest of sarcasm, and I've proved it to you, and sometimes I've got paid for it. But in seriousness now, do I seriously misrepresent the situation? You must believe something like that happened, or did not, in order to address the whole question of where monotheism comes from. I would say it can't be proved that that isn't how we came to understand the morality and the need for it, but I would regard it in the light of the other evidence I've touched upon as being in the very highest degree improbable. That is the way we discovered how to think, how to decide how to live with one another, what our duties are to each other, and so forth. And I submit it to you in all, no, I'm not going to say humility. I just submit it to you, okay? And again, if this was the plan, was it made by someone who likes us? Well, that's another question. And if so, why have 99.9% of all the other species that have ever been created already died out? And part of what plan was that? You see, if it is a plan or a design and one cannot positively prove that it is not, it only restates the original problem. The planner must be either very capricious, really toying with his creation, or very clumsy, very tinkering, and fantastically wasteful. Throw away 99.9% of what you've made. Or very cruel and very callous, or just perhaps very indifferent, or some combination of all the above. And so it's no good saying that he moves in mysterious ways, or that he has purposes that are opaque to us, because even that kind of evasion has to make itself predicate on the assumption that the person saying this knows more than I do about the supernatural. And I haven't yet met anyone who does have a private line to the Creator of the sort that would be required even to speculate about it. In other words, I've never met anyone in holy orders or out of it who isn't also a primate. And neither have you. Thus, when the local prince of the church, who I was sorry to miss on Tony's show, Cardinal Archbishop George Pell, takes leave to tell me, and he's going to tell you under this roof, that in his own words, without God we are nothing. My reply is, Your Eminence, please don't talk to me in that tone of voice. I'm not a slave, and I'm on the side of anyone who is in their emancipation. And it's the mind-forged manacles that are often the hardest to break. I'm sorry to tell the Cardinal Archbishop, and I wish I could say it to his face, I have to some of his colleagues, as you might say, that he's wrong twice. He's first wrong in his concept of a deity, in other words, as someone without whom we would be nothing. And he's wrong, second, to declare that we are worthless without agreeing with his concept of that concept. And I demand to know how he knows. His Eminence is claiming to know more than a primate can possibly know, and he's showing that he knows much less than most primates probably should. So if someone says to me, and I've heard it in my travels, without the dear leader, we are lost. We are nothing. It used to be said in Italy in the Mussolini period, il duce ha sempre ragione. The leader is always right. Mussolini is always right. Ein Reich, ein Volk, ein Führer. We only need one leader, one people, and one regime. All of this has the smack of the totalitarian. And without the leader, we'd be lost. We'd have no choice but to commit suicide. I say, we've come this far with Jim. Let's drink it now. Without him, we're nothing. With most of those sort of invocations, one hears instantly, or rather, I would say one smells instantly, the unmistakable stench of the totalitarian temptation. And we should be armored. It should be innate in us to resist it. And where it isn't, we should learn how to build it up as a matter of survival. But instead, religious morality asks us to overcome doubt, to overcome skepticism, to leave it behind, to suspect the faculty that of ours is the most precious of all, the ability to philosophize, the ability to think for ourselves, the ability to challenge existing authority. No, that's all to be distrusted. That could be a temptation. The evil one, it's not an accident, says that it's the tree of knowledge of good and evil that at all costs you must avoid, because anything to do with knowledge could immediately turn profane. So we know nothing about the quantum except that there is such a thing. That's as far as we've got with it now. We know it works. We know if you use it, you can measure an extraordinary number of things to an amazing degree, but we don't know how it works. We don't know about galaxy formation. We know a lot about our DNA, but we can't yet use it to cure ourselves. We're miles from doing any of that. I won't re-emphasize the incredible amount we don't know about the cosmological. And the uncertainty principles adumbrated by Werner Heisenberg. All we know is that we know much less and less, but at least we know less and less about much more and more. So is this a time to say we don't need any further inquiry? All we need is faith in the boss? I would say not. It's just as when I am asked, when the question is put, is there free will? The believer will say yes, because we've been given it. Of course there's free will. The big guy says so. Who am I to disagree? Well, that seems to me to be absolutely self-cancelling nonsense. If I say, my answer when I'm asked is there free will? I say, yeah, I think there's free will. We have free will. We have no choice. At least I know I'm being ironic. The people who say, free will, you've got to have it, it's a rule we've got to have free will. It says, don't even know they're being literal. This is the difference between not just the ironic and the literal mind, but between the inquiring and the philosophical, the scientific mind, and the religious one. And that's why they are not just non-overlapping, or rather overlapping, but in a hostile manner, but they're irreconcilable, in my judgment. Socrates, like Jesus, may well not have existed. We don't have any absolute proof. He certainly, like Jesus, didn't write anything down. He only exists as a concept in the minds of his followers. I don't mind about that. It doesn't bother me, because I don't say that he died and my sins were as a result forgiven. Or that he didn't really die, so they're forgiven all over again, except that apparently he's got to come back and die again before, the whole experiment has to be rerun to be convincing. No, I say what Socrates taught me is exactly that the definition of an educated person is knowing how little they know and being modest and humble in that sense, not in the sense of self-abnegation, but saying, please give me the strength to realize that I'm only on the first step of a voyage of inquiry and discovery. And that method is the one that has set more people free than any faith. Against this, again, the Prince of the Church will tell you, well, again, a rather totalitarian thought, love is compulsory. And you have to love someone who you also are forced to fear, in fact, who you're enjoined to fear. I've always found there's something rather creepy about the idea of compulsory love, let alone of someone who is a fear figure. It's a sinister idea, I think, a rather abject idea. sort of sadomasochistic concept of a relationship. It's a prostrating idea, and it crucially devalues love by making it something that can be extorted, or that should be extorted. As well as poisoning the well of intellectual inquiry, it taints the well springs of our finer emotions. And now I've mentioned poison, I suppose I have to go from the megalo if you like, to the micro, to this very simple question that we're stuck with, and I must not trespass too much on the time I have with the Reverend Jones, but take the simplest case about whether our morality is innate or not. And every time I'm asked this question, if you didn't believe in God, how would you know what was good and what wasn't? Every time I'm asked to speak on this, the Daily News allows me to give a different answer and give a different example. Take the simplest case of what I believe is innate, our instinct for our children. You don't have to be a parent to have this. You see a child trying to rush into the traffic. If you're not a parent, something tells you what you probably ought to be doing about it. The care and love and protection of children is instinct in us, in fact in many other species too that don't claim to be divinely ordered around. It's something we all share without having to have it explained to us. We may say that that those who don't have it, the psychopaths who don't seem to have it, or who take delight in breaking this commandment or rule, we say that they're bestial, but again I refer you to the animal kingdom that doesn't allow such transgressions. Now, our whole culture is currently being convulsed, rightly I think, over an offence committed more than 3 decades ago against a young woman of 13, a girl of 13, by a famous man who was stupid enough to try and sue Vanity Fair and thus incurred my curse and displeasure. It's good that such an argument can go on for so long, I think, legally and morally, because it shows that individual rights are paramount too, just as it was right that France should convulse itself and suspend all other business until the question of Captain Alfred Dreyfus had been settled one way or another. It shows not just that justice is important, but that the individual is the only unit of currency in which this kind of thing can be discussed. Now, the very best I found you can say in Mr. Polanski's defense would be that there was some kind of sick complicity involved, that either the girl or her ambitious parents or the general context of permissiveness or something of the sort gave him the feeling that it was probably okay or not that bad to give her a muscle-relaxing drug as well as some booze. And then don't ask yourself why he wanted her muscles relaxed, please, because then you'll have to read the court transcript and you'll find out. And it's pretty horrifying. And I think people are quite right to be instinctively outraged, to think, no, if I can think of the worst thing I've ever done, you're already thinking of it. The thing about yourself you'd least like to have generally known, complete silence. Very satisfying. Most of you, I imagine, are thinking, yeah, but I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't. And I won't, no one needs to tell me why I wouldn't have either. So that's all I want to say about that. But I'm much more outraged currently by what happened not 3 decades ago, but 3 weeks ago to Miss Fawzia Youssef, a Yemeni girl who died in childbirth in a hospital in Yemen, hemorrhaging to death, trying to give birth to an already dead baby, the result of her having been married, compulsorily but legally, at the age of 11. That's what happened to Fawzia Youssef on our watch. She died in childbirth, trying to give birth to a dead baby. Husband 3 times her age, who was legally married to her. As it's estimated, 1/4 of the young womanhood of Yemen already is. Married at the very, very latest by the age of 15. And though there have been moves in the Yemeni parliament to raise the age at which a young lady may be betrothed, these moves have been blocked, even as recently as last September after this outrage, by a political party, which I will not tell you the name of this political party, but it is not the Yemeni Secular Party. In Iran, the age of consent doesn't come up, by the way, because there is no consent to any sex outside marriage in Islamic society in any case, and many kinds of it are punishable by death. But the age at which a young girl may be married was moved up finally. The Islamic Revolution put it back to 9, I think it was moved up to 11, which you might say was progress of a kind. Now, you see, this isn't just backward countries we're talking about. And let's not beat about the bush. The Prophet Muhammad was betrothed to his favorite wife Aisha when she was 6. It wasn't thought fit that he could marry her then in the full sense of the term, but he put it off till she was 9. And across a vast swathe of the world, worse things than Roman Polanski has even thought of doing are done as a matter of law and of course, and in the name of, no, not in the name of, but because of the preachings of God's anointed. And then the religious turn to you and you say, secularism must mean moral relativism. Your ethics are situational. And I say, well, let's just hear that again. Because given that I've taken the simplest moral baseline it's possible to take, the protection of defenseless children, isn't it true that all the leading religions of the world are Abrahamic? Yes, we love to stress it. We adore to say that we have all this wonderful multicultural thing in common. And what was Abraham most famous for, apart from having a wife who had a baby when she was 101, which is an advance over dying in childbirth when you're 11, having been raped, probably by a close male relative, if you really want the truth. Apart from that, Abraham's most famous for saying, if God wants me to kill my boy, of course I will. And the only difference between the monotheisms is that some say it was Isaac and some say it was Ishmael. I don't particularly care. But there are annual festivities on the part of the faithful to say, we wish we too were capable of such faith. And we want to beat our breasts in sympathy with those who are. Why do the Jewish people blow the ram's horn, the shofar? Because the shofar symbolizes the ram who is sacrificed instead. The blood sacrifice is the main thing. And there has to be a child involved. This seems to me to be disgraceful. And what's taken for granted that goes with it, because it was practiced on Isaac too in the form of a covenant and imitated by others, the genital mutilation of the young, to seal the pact with God, to say, nothing matters to me, not the life or health or bodily integrity of my child, never mind that. What has to be proved is, without God I am nothing. I'll kill for it, and I'm not just willing to say that, I'm willing to prove it, and I'm willing to use my children's bodies as the theatre of this enactment of faith. Well, civilization, in my submission, ladies and gentlemen, begins where that evil nonsense leaves off. And we have to advance the time when more and more people will be able to civilize themselves by outgrowing religion and leaving this awful nonsense behind. And with that, I think I've realized that if you haven't copped my drift by now, I might as well go and sit in that chair anyway. Very nice of you to come. Thank you.
This talk was recorded at Sydney Opera House in 2009 and was presented by the Sydney Opera House and the Ethics Centre.